All right. Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad to have you here as we talk about co-regulation in schools. I'm Heide Emrich. I'm a private speech pathologist and a certified RDI program consultant. And I'm the founder of the With Gift, an online company that supports parents and educators in building a deeper neurodiversity affirming relationship with themselves, each other, and the children they guide. So welcome today. Our goal today is to share why co-regulation in schools is critical and how it can be done effectively. But before we dive in, I do want to read this land acknowledgement. So we acknowledge that the land on which we gather today is located on the Haldeman Tract, land that was granted to the Haudenosaunee of the Six Nations of the Grand River, and is within the territory of the Chinanton, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples. We acknowledge the enduring presence of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today, their achievements, and their contributions to our community. So I am really excited to have you all here to join Michelle Vanderwindt and myself in conversation with Linda Murphy, the author of the Declarative Language Handbook and the Co-Regulation Handbook. Both of these books I have read many times and have recommended to every family and school team I support in my private practice. And in a moment, I will post a link to Linda's website in the chat. But before we get started, I just want to tell you about our format. For the first 30 minutes, there will be a discussion between myself, Michelle, and Linda. And then we will follow that up with a time for questions and answers. Some of you have already submitted questions, which we hope to answer during our discussion. And as you think of more questions and comments during our discussion, please post them in the chat. We will do our best to answer these during that Q&A time. And if you want to ask the question yourself, feel free to put up your hand and we'll try and get you up to join us on the screen. So please note that this is all going to be recorded and posted to YouTube and thewithgift.com. So if you want to stay anonymous, please turn your video off and you're welcome to change your name. So let's start with our introductions. Michelle, welcome. Tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, I'm a speech language pathologist working in the Waterloo Guelph area. I currently work for school board, and so I bring that, but I've also spent many years working in pediatric settings as well. So thanks for having me today.
Thank you, Michelle. Linda, could you please introduce yourself and let us know why you decided to write a co-regulation handbook also?
Sure. I'm a speech language pathologist and also an RDI consultant. I've been a speech language pathologist for just about 25 years now and an RDI consultant maybe for 16 years. And I learned about declarative language and co-regulation through the RDI community, first and foremost. So I always want to give credit where credit is due. But I didn't learn about these concepts in graduate school for speech therapy, but yet they changed everything that I did and I think made my practice as a clinician better. Declarative language, I think I wrote first, Declarative Language Handbook, just because it was the easiest to explain, and I knew it was a shift that people who wanted to give it a try could learn pretty quickly and practice it. But then, as Declarative Language Handbook was out there, I found that I got a lot of questions about what to do when it didn't work. And in my head, I knew that I always pulled in co-regulation and just this concept of co-regulation that I had learned again from the RDI community. So it just made sense to write the follow-up to Declarative Language Handbook, just because I really do consider them partners. Like I don't use one without the other. How I pull each concept in varies based on the moment, based on the individual that I'm with. But they're always partnered in my brain. And I always think of it as that declarative language is a way of speaking, but co-regulation is a way of being. or declarative language helps me know what to say, but co-regulation helps me know what to do. So they're just the main tools in my tool bag, and I just wanted to be able to talk about them with everybody.
Thanks. That's a great explanation. And also just the contrast between the two and yet how similar they are. So wonderful. Um, can you describe for us what you actually mean by co-regulation and how it might
Yeah,
be different or related to
yeah.
self-reg?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's so interesting because so I became an RDI consultant in 2007, 2008, and that was a brand new term for me, co-regulation. I know, in the past 16 years, the world has come really far and everybody's talking about co-regulation and everybody gets it. But the way that I first learned about it through the RDI community is using the definition by Alan Fogel, who's a researcher. He wrote a book called Developing Through Relationships. And I'll kind of explain what that means. But for me, it just made so much sense because it talked very specifically about communication and dynamic communication. So on the ground for me, co-regulation as a speech language pathologist who wants to support dynamic communication means that I just have to be fully present to the person that I'm with and respond in the moment and contingently to the communication that they send to me. And then I send it back. So it's balanced and it's reciprocal. It's not predetermined. And it's just really holding with care the communication that each partner brings within any exchange or interaction. So I think like where a lot of the world talks about co-regulation right now is in terms of self-regulation. So, which just means that we can manage our physical state, the feelings we might have on the inside, in a way that feels good for each context that we're in. So self-regulation doesn't mean we're calm. It just means we're managing all those internal experiences that we have in a way that feels successful and manageable for the context that we're in. So I think, as we grow, we can do this better because our nervous system matures. But when we're young, we really need, for example, newborns, babies, toddlers, like need their caregiver to co-regulate and help them manage all those internal experiences, whether it's hurt or hungry or uncomfortable, sad, whatever it might be. The caregiver supports that managing of those internal experiences. And I think, where we bring in or expand it to then include the dynamic communication angle that we're thinking of is when, for example, a caregiver is with that newborn, they are, of course, fully present in that moment and responding to that newborn's needs. Like you can't script out what a newborn might need and follow any prescribed recipe because it very much depends on where that unique individual is in each moment in time. So that's where it starts. And what I think about too is it doesn't matter how old we get, we never stop needing to co-regulate with another person in that way as well. Like I could be upset about something, and if I have somebody to talk to or bounce ideas off of or go for a walk with, that's also going to help me manage those internal experiences that might feel uncomfortable to me. So we are always going to use co-regulation to support our self-regulation. But then also, I really think as a speech language pathologist about this angle of co-regulation that's more related to the development of dynamic communication.
Thank you.
I'm like, that's a mouthful, but
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so co-regulation, we like, I use that with parents in their homes, but it's also effective in schools. And so I guess that's what we're here to talk to, right? We can use this strategy. I guess the question is, can we use it with all kids or only a specific few in the school? Because we have lots of kids there.
yeah, and I will let any of you answer that. But of course, like we're all human beings and we all need to co-regulate um, to be successful in the world, to manage our inner experiences, to know what we need to do. even to validate our own communication and feel that we are important communicators in this world, we need that other person to co-regulate with us.
Right.
And I think I would add too, in that everyone is at their own levels of development. Even like if we're teaching kids to read, everyone comes in wired a little differently or have maybe natural tendencies towards print and literacy. I think that's sort of true with regulation skills. Some kids come in with their nervous system hardwired a different way. So I think rather than looking at if they have a diagnosis or what, we look at what a child needs and work with that. So some kids do need more support to develop their regulation skills. And that's like one of the most important indicators of academic success is a child's ability to self-regulate. So co-regulation is going to be supporting that skill, and there's different ways, different entry points for different kids at that point. So I hope that helps answer that question too.
So co-regulation is really about a little bit about serve and return. So we provide some sort of an action or talking, and child does something and also, and we kind of, it's like a dance, I would think, right? I wanted to just clarify that we're not just talking about talking. We're actually talking about actions. Do you want to dive deeper into that a little bit, Linda?
Sure. Well, I think, again, if we go back to early communication development or early development, it's nonverbal. Um, there's lots of co-regulating that happens when an individual is not yet a language user. And that doesn't change over the course of time. We all communicate in lots of different ways, like we do talk, but all the nonverbal communication that we use also complements our communication or enriches it even. So that might be the gestures that we use, the facial expressions that we use, our tone of voice or our prosody, our proximity to another person communicates, for example, how comfortable we are with that person. Our body orientation, like turning towards someone versus turning away from something, is communicative. So we can never take that away from communication. Or I always just like to think about how communication is a whole package and it includes all these different things. And yeah, and so when we first start co-regulating, it's largely nonverbal early on in development.
Yeah. Yeah. So in a few minutes, we'll talk about what kinds of activities might be part of co-regulation. But first, how about let's get into guiding principles as we start using this strategy in our school settings and at home too. If we have parents here, this works. This is good for home too. There are some guiding principles that Linda, you had a really nice handout that we'll put a link to, but some guiding principles around entering into a co-regulation activity. I think the very first one is about your mindset. Can we enter into the engagement with a positive intention and mindset? Michelle, you had a really great quote that you.
Yeah, and this resonates for me. And when I talk to educators about this, so I'm gonna quote Linda from her book. So the mindset isn't do this, do that, get that done, because sometimes that's what it feels like. It's more, I'm your partner. We're going to transfer skills and at a pace that keeps you successful. We start where we start, and we're in this together. So that really resonated with me, because when you feel that connection with the kid, you really know it. Like sometimes when I'm consulting in schools and we're trying to figure out how to support a student, we have to come back to building support and connection. And when kids are verbal, we might use verbal conversations and things like that. But when kids are minimally verbal and are still learning to communicate, I think that ability to connect through a co-regulation strategy, and using declarative language can become really powerful and really rewarding for everyone working with the child. So, and what I love about this is you may already be doing it. Now you just know you should do more of it. And there's lots of opportunities throughout the day if we start with that mindset that we're not accomplishing a goal, we're working on a process, and we're coordinating our actions with the child, and giving them a competent role so they feel connected to us and we feel connected to them.
Thanks. Part of that guiding principle when you enter into that engagement with people, with another child or with another person, is how open and inviting are you, right? And what would be the way that we present ourselves? So our voice, is it stern, or is it a little bit more open and inviting? And even just the rate of speech that we use, if it can affect everybody differently. Some kids might need to have a little bit of a faster kind of way to pull them in by just the way you're showing excitement and stuff. But there's other kids, and a lot of them, that actually require a little bit more processing time, so that we take that into consideration and even enter into an engagement with a slower, more purposeful talking rate. So that allows for that processing, and we be patient for them, right? And another thing too is about just the nonverbal communication overall. Like, yes, our voice and our rate of speech, but even the way we present ourselves and our body, like this versus inviting. Either of you have any more to add to those kinds of things?
Yeah, well, I can even just say, like, part of why this matters so much is because a lot of the individuals we might work with are so sensitive um, to our communication, even subtle changes in our communication. And so if we are communicating stress or tension through our tone of voice, through our rate of speech, through our body position, they're going to feel that and respond in kind. So if we want the person we're with to feel competent, to feel engaged, to feel successful, then it just really, really helps when we're mindful of how we're presenting ourselves as communicators and how we are open to them versus judgmental of them in the moment. Like, it all just really, really matters.
You said that so beautifully. Thank you. How about we start breaking co-regulation down? The idea of how do we set this up? What's involved? Let's start with roles.
Yeah. Do you want me to go?
Yeah,
Should I
please.
go? And I guess, again, this is coming back, like, this is the framework that I think about for co-regulation, where we're maintaining that contingency and that presence. But then we're also starting to use this framework as kind of a backdrop for learning or teaching somebody new skills, or when we want to support them to learn something, even maybe that's important to them. And this framework is, again, like what I've learned from RDI. So it's not like my original. I just really use it a lot. I see it work. It really helps me and it guides my practice. So the very first thing we always think about when we enter an engagement using a co-regulatory framework is we want to assure that the individual we're with has a role that is competent for them. And competence just means, in my own words, RDI's words, probably even Dr. Gustine's back in the day, is that the individual can do whatever it is the role we're giving them, they can do it on their own, as long as we give them enough time, and perhaps a tiny bit of help, but primarily they can do it on their own. And so if you ever notice that you're with a student and you're prompting them a lot, then that's not a competent role for them. And you want to kind of back up and rethink an opportunity within that, or rethink a role within what you're doing for them that will truly be competent. And we always start with competence because when individuals feel competent, they engage pretty readily. I think they avoid interactions or don't engage when they feel as though they're not competent. So that's where we always want to start, and we always want to find that place of competence because that's where engagement will be most successful. And from that place, we move forward, or we start where we start, right? Like Michelle just said. So anyway, if either of you want to add to that, I know there's a couple of more pieces, but I'll pause so that you both can jump in.
But I see that all the time when a child, and I may have worded it differently, but I like taking that lens of competency. So sometimes I'll say, well, the task has to match their developmental and cognitive level. So if we're doing a matching task and they know how to match and that's all we're giving them, they're going to get bored. Or if we're using language that's too high and they can't participate, they might leave the room. So again, it's a little bit like Goldilocks. We have to find it's just right. So I think you talk about the edge of competency, that we have to just find that in between spot, and that's what we do as educators and therapists. Is we're always trying to find just that right level that's not too easy and that's not too hard. So we're supporting and encouraging growth and development. So sometimes that can be it takes some trial and error to find that right spot.
Yeah. And it's dynamic too. I think, stuff happens and individuals have different inner experiences. Like they could have fatigue, they could have hunger, there could be something that happened in their day that is throwing them off a little bit. So the competent role that you find today, like, might be a little different than the competent role that you established yesterday. But as the educator in there, like, we are the ones that have to be dynamic in that moment to find that initial place of engagement, knowing it'll grow from there. But it really helps everything when we can get that first place just right. Or I guess you've got it right because the individual joins. But then would you like me to go on to the other two parts of it too? Okay. So we want to think about competence, but then with co-regulation, again, we're thinking about partnership and doing things together. So as you consider a learning opportunity or a task, whatever it might be, you then want to think about a role. Well, it's always great when things are authentic. So you want to use real life opportunities for learning. Those are always going to be the most meaningful, the most easy to generalize to new learning contexts. And it just, the individual just will get so much real life learning, whether it's vocabulary or situational learning. And purpose, it gives them purpose because it means something on the ground when it's an authentic role. And then last is contingency. So whatever the opportunity is that we're doing together, we want to think about what's the student's role, and then what could my role be that is contingent on that student's role. So even, like, I'll just give a very basic example to start. Like, one that I love to do, or that I think is just such a nice one, in schools could be watering plants. So it's real. There's going to be so many learning opportunities, from filling up a watering can to carrying it. So you're going to get motor skills in there, to walking together to carry the watering can to a plant, where you can then talk about the cycle of life, perhaps, or seasonal plants, or how plants might change over the course of time, like watching a plant grow. And it's just so purposeful and meaningful because the student can even see, wow, I'm watering this plant and I can see it growing. Like, that's really cool. But then competent, authentic, contingent roles might be water filler upper, water can holder, pourers together, spiller cleaner uppers because it might spill. There's just so many really nice learning opportunities in there that are authentic and meaningful. And you just want to think about all along the way, what's the role that the student will be competent in.
Thank you. That's a great a great activity too. And okay, so we have three things to think about: is the competent role, an authentic role, being it's meaningful and real, and then a contingent role because it's a partnership. It's at least two people in the
Mhm.
co-regulation.
Someone has put a comment, a really important comment here. I'm just gonna try and get it on my screen so I can read it. With such a dynamic individual process like co-regulation, what is your suggestion for a teacher who's supporting 20 plus students at the same time? Where should they start? I think it's a real valid question. And I'm glad that that popped up in your chat box. And I think what I like about this strategy is that, and if you've had an opportunity to read some of Linda's book, you can find these opportunities through your daily activities. So rather, I mean, sometimes we can create opportunities for sure, but I think sometimes it's just shifting the lens and looking at how we do that in what we're already doing. Something like you hand out paper and then you collect things. That might be a role for a student in your class to hold the bin where people put all of the papers in. So rather than having it at the front of the class where everyone walks up and puts the papers in, maybe you have students that go around and collect it, so that there is a really meaningful role for each person. Sometimes, like if you're supporting a student with autism walking down the hallway, and I see this all the time, you know, they're either the educators carrying the child's backpack, or the backpack's left on the floor and you're trying to get the kid to carry the backpack. You know, you could do that as a role together. I'm going to take this side and you take that side. So now you're working together and you're building that connection. And I think what's also really great about this is when we look at what helps kids feel connected and calm, it is that connection with another human being. So this is a beautiful way to do that. If we think a little bit about, well, what are we already doing in our day-to-day classroom routine? Because I get it, you know, if you're in kindergarten, you've got 30 students. So there's a, you know, even if you divide and conquer with two people, that's still a lot of people. So thinking about those authentic opportunities that are happening, they're going to happen anyway. Like at home, you might think about loading dishwashers and doing the laundry and taking out the garbage, but there are also things that happen every day in a classroom. And I don't know, Linda and Heide, if you have any other comments to that question.
Yeah, well, I can go first. Then you, Ida. You know, sometimes when you have a classroom with 20 kids, not all the kids are struggling. So the kids who are probably doing okay are probably really successful at finding competent roles for themselves throughout the day. It's mostly the kids who are struggling, and those are the ones that you want to keep your eye on. And when you see, it's going to come across as a challenging behavior or disruptive behavior, any of that stuff. And those are the kids that when you see that, this is where the shift in our lens is helpful. So I might see a child who is disruptive, and I might think, okay, that child does not have a role right now that's competent for them. And that's the child that I want to hone in on and tweak their role just a little bit so that it's competent for them. You know, it might be that what we've asked the whole class to do is pretty okay for most of the kids, but too hard for this one. And that's why disruption is happening. And that's where maybe you could come in and say, you know what, I would love help with X, Y, and Z while the other kids get settled on this math problem. And you can engage that student right there and then as a means of regulating with them while then helping them get settled into the work at a level that just might be just right for their development and that sort of thing. But Heide, what do you think?
That's a really important point, right? That changing that lens, that idea of what can I give them versus get them to do. Yeah, which is really important. I wanted to tack on some ideas around with those 20 plus students. Sometimes we can also engage them all together in a little bit of co-regulation opportunities, which you are probably already doing sometimes with body breaks and things like that are happening anyways, but maybe consider the time like to do insert something that is a little bit more physical, but that we're all doing in sync together, where we all watch each other and we try and do it at the same time. That's co-regulation. It's a little bit harder because it's having more people to watch. But with lots of kids, sometimes you can't just do it with one person at a time. So you could find ways, like it might be choral singing or chanting or an echo and response kind of activity that you can get the kids involved in, and making sure that whatever response they have to do, that the children that are really struggling would be able to do. So it might be a single word or it might be an action. So things like that, drumming circles can be fun too, and clapping games. And the other thing I wanted to tack on to what you were saying, Michelle, too, is that the idea that there's all sorts of stuff that have to happen in the class anyways. So how can we turn some of that into a co-regulation opportunity with maybe one child or maybe a few? And watering plants was one of the things, but something that in our an earlier conversation that came up and I thought that's brilliant is like things like decorating the bulletin board. And it's not stuff like the classroom doesn't have to be perfect. You can actually have the kids help you in creating and changing and doing things. Maybe rearranging the desks together might be something that is a way to do a bit of co-regulation. Things like delivering packages and sharpening pencils and handing out snacks. They can be two-person kinds of jobs. Wiping the whiteboards. One person's the sprayer and the other one's the wiper. So there are little ways to insert that, those ideas. I was thinking too about setting, like every morning, the classroom schedule. Sometimes teachers have like a schedule up on the board, and maybe one of the kids can actually help put that up. Just be the hander of the picture or something, and the teacher can put it in the right spot, or the other way, depending on competency, right? Are there any other activities that you can think of?
Yeah, well, even I think like the beauty of it all is if once you carry the framework, competent, authentic, contingent, the roles are everywhere. It's really creative, it's really dynamic. So literally, I just think anytime I have to do something, I just think, oh, how can I include someone in this? What's a competent role that I could give to this person right now? Um, so that's the beauty of it. It's everywhere. Once we start to um, look for it, and like you said, just anytime a teacher might feel like they have to get something done ahead of time, you really don't. Just include the students.
I think even something like if you're going to be doing some literacy work, I'm going to write one letter, you write a letter too. Like you can incorporate it in things like that, or depending on the dynamics. Like there's, teachers know their classrooms and they know how much they can, kids can handle in terms of like I'm thinking of moving desks that might work for some classrooms, but not for other classrooms. Like we're just trying to generate lots of ways to think of creative thinking. There's, your classroom best, and you know what your students are able to manage. But again, if you do have that opportunity to work one-on-one, think even working through counting or things like that, that there's some back and forth. And again, we talk about that reciprocity, that this is that building block. I think about kids that are not yet using a lot of words. I had a student where the teacher's goal was just for her to hold a marker and make a mark on a page. That's where she was at. I think she probably can do more, but we just have to, again, find that confident role for her. So I was facing her. So I was, face to face, and there was no expectation. I was modeling, and I drew a picture of a car, and I know she likes wheels on the bus. So I was singing Wheels on the Bus, and I was circling the wheels, and she started doing the actions. So now I found something that she was interested in. She knew what her role was. And then, when I offered her the marker and made, I used declarative language and said, oh, we can do lots of different things with the bus. And she wanted to do the wipers. So I pointed to where the wipers went. So she drew through where the wipers went. So I'm like, yes, she's holding a marker and she's coloring now. But again, I wasn't thinking that I was doing co-regulation, but I realized in retrospect, actually, that's really what we did. We coordinated our actions together. She had a meaningful role, and we were at a level where she was interested in, like you said earlier, when a child feels competent, you get engagement. She knew what to do with this. She understood the role of singing that song because that was something familiar. So I felt really excited for her. I'm like, oh, how can we do this with other things so that she can be more of a participant in the classroom? The EA was with me, and we were having a great time with her and figuring this out together. So co-regulating each other, I guess. But just as an example that we can apply this in so many different ways. Like you said, when you have the framework and you understand what your goal is, we're not trying to get her to write. We're doing an engagement. That was the teacher's goal, but how we went about it was really about supporting the student and finding a way that she could participate that was meaningful for her. So I hope that helps explain it some more too.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. You use the word framework, and I think Linda, you talk about frameworks actually in your book. Maybe this is a good time just to take a few minutes before we start into questions about different kinds of ways that we can set up activities. So just to kind of broaden your idea around what that might be.
Yeah, so Michelle, I know you were just talking about coordinating actions. We were talking way back about just nonverbal communication, and often that's where that co-regulation starts, is noticing each other's actions or body position or whatever it might be. So the idea essentially is that we're coordinating actions with the other person in different ways. So we're not worrying about talking, like we'll be using declarative language to narrate what we're doing, but our goal is not to get the other person talking. Again, it just goes back to engagement and what's a competent role that I can give them, or a way that they and myself can coordinate actions. So we'll give you these 4 frameworks. The first one is just called assembly line. And the way I think about it is you, me, place. So essentially it might be I hand something to you and you put it in its place, or vice versa. You give something to me and I put it in its place. So we can imagine this framework with passing out papers. I give you a paper, you give it to the other student. Passing out snacks. It could be cleaning up. Hey, I'll hand you a book and you can put it on the bookshelf. Or would you like to hand me a book and I'll put it on the bookshelf? That kind of thing. And it's a low pressure context and really easy teamwork. For example, cleanup, or even setup of something. So there's many, many opportunities that you can do an assembly line. And most students are pretty successful being a hander or a receiver. Like it's a pretty, it's a pretty competent role for a lot of kids, which is great. And it's a great place to start. The next one I think about is called complementary. And it just means we are together in this, but doing different but related actions. So for this one, I think about, say there's trash to be thrown out. It might be that I hold the trash can and the child can toss the trash in. So this can be really fun. So it might be, instead of saying, hey, can you throw that trash away? I might instead say, hey, I've got the trash can. If you want to throw that trash in, that would be really cool. And then it becomes a little more even playful or exciting, or like a lot less demanding than take this trash and walk all the way over there and throw it away. Another one of that could be could be if you're in the kitchen, or even an arts and crafts activity, or making slime, a science experiment. It could be something like, I'll hold the bowl while you stir, or I'll hold the measuring cup. Or you can hold the measuring cup while I pour the glue in, something like that. So it's slightly different roles, but they're connected. They're both needed. I think next is parallel. I love parallel too, because I think it's pretty low pressure and it just means we're doing the same thing at the same time. So it could be something as simple as walking down the hall together. It could be carrying a bag together. It could be like with peer interaction, it could be on scooter boards together alongside each other. It could be, if you're rearranging the classroom, it could be moving desks and chairs together. Like, hey, we can move this chair together. I'll take this end of the chair and you can take that end. Like, kids love to move furniture. It's a lot of fun. It could be we're walking down the hall, both carrying books alongside each other. And it's just, it's just this really nice framework that creates these really nice memories of shared experiences where you're doing the same thing at the same time. And the student doesn't have to worry about too much. Like, there's not tons of cognitive demand on them to bog them down. It's just, we're moving together. I can be your model so you know what to do, or we're doing it in partnership so that you don't feel alone. And then the last one is reciprocal. And this is what I think of as just the more traditional turn taking, where it's I take a turn and then you take the same turn. So it could be board games, like I move my piece, then you move your piece. Or if it's an art project, it could be I'll add a sticker and then you add a sticker, something like that. But I do it and then you do it.
Thank you. I hope that gives everybody some ideas around how things could be set up, because there's all different ways of doing that co-regulation. And what it brings to mind is one big question that I keep getting over and over again is like, well, what about independence? Aren't they supposed to do this independently, or they can do this independently? I get that question a lot. So yeah, anybody want to take that one?
Yeah. Do you want to go first, Michelle?
Sure. I think I don't know. I think that comes where we're finding competent roles. And again, we're looking at, building complexity with that. If it's too easy, then we need to add some complexity to it. So we're not going to stay doing the same thing all the time if we know the child's mastered that and is able to do that. But I feel like Linda would have a much more robust answer than mine.
I like that, though. I'm going to build off of that.
Good.
Yeah, I think so. What's really cool, what happens is when kids are competent in the role that they have, they spontaneously seek out more responsibility. So we could add complexity for sure when we notice it, but a lot of the times they might seek it out. So for example, we are if I go back to an example, like initially we carry the chair together, but then once the child has it, they don't want me to carry the chair with them. They've got it and they can do it a lot faster without me, and they will. So it's almost like my partnership serves as a scaffold for them to learn that role, and then they assume responsibility for more and more parts of it. So I would say that's the example when they've mastered the role that we've given them. They spontaneously seek out more. I think the other thing, so in regards to independence, sometimes I think about like, when do you want to, say, for example, work on those self-care skills where you do want the child to be able to put their shoes on their own so that they can do it, versus when is it better to use that co-regulatory partnership? And so say self-care or dressing or putting on shoes in the morning. Some of the students we work with might need more time. And so maybe on a weekend when we have a lot of time, they can manage it and they can do it on their own. And that's great. And that's a great time for us to give them that opportunity. But if it's in the morning and we're trying to get out the door and we don't have the time to give them to be competent in that role, then I shift to that more co-regulatory partnership where it might be, I'll do the left, you can do the right, or I'll help you put your shoe on, you can do the Velcro. And it's not that they're not becoming independent. It's just that I am prioritizing in that moment our time management as a team and our positive connection so that we feel good around each other, and even creating positive forward momentum so that we reach our shared goal of getting to school on time. So I think we as educators can be and support people that can be really dynamic in there in terms of what we prioritize when. Sometimes we can prioritize, you know what, I think you can do this whole process on your own and we do have the time for you to do that. So let's do that. Or I know you can usually do this on your own, but I don't, but I'm also thinking about our time. So let's do it together so we both feel good getting out the door and not frustrated with each other, feeling incompetent because we're
Well,
late and we couldn't do it. Yeah.
and I think that brings up such a valid point, because I get this from educators all the time. Well, I know they can do it, so I'm going to wait until they can do it. Or you, and then I see this power struggle become an issue. And I think too, like, there's nights when I come home and I don't feel like making dinner. I know how to make dinner. I can do it. I'm competent. But I've got other things, the fatigue, maybe I'm getting sick or something, that there are other factors that make, no, I need a break from it. And I feel that for, I can verbalize that. But for some of our students that don't understand that about their body, but they just know at the moment that they really, this is a struggle. I like that support. How good would that feel if your partner were to say, I know I don't feel like cooking dinner, let's order in, or to validate how I felt, or to say, well, you know what, I have an idea for dinner. If you don't mind, getting the water going for pasta, I'll make the rest. Like that coordination piece. So I think we can take that kindness and compassion and add it to our kids, that just because they did it one day, today's a little bit different. They might need a different kind of support. Again, being dynamic is, I think, is it's I really have to observe and watch and know our students and use that information. I think I watch a lot of amazing adults work with kids, and they have good observation skills. And I hope this gives you ideas on what to do next, because you've observed all of this, and let's now use this knowledge about giving kids competent roles that may change, and it's dynamic, to help everyone feel successful, mostly for the child too.
You were reminding me too. I'll just share this example. I'm like, in my house, my husband cooks. I hate cooking. I'm not very good at it, but I do the dishes. I'm good at doing dishes. And that's always our co-regulatory partnership. Yeah. Neither person does all of it.
Right.
Yeah, that's neat. Neither person does all of it. We do it somehow together. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
So this is also relationship counseling too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. We do have a few questions, but I do wanted to just ask quickly. And Michelle, I think this might be kind of your area. How does co-regulation tie into classroom or student goals?
Oh, right. Again, I think it comes to, if we think about competency, we can look at differentiated instruction. So again, looking at what we need to do for a student. It's easy for the three of us to say, you start where you start, and to be focused on the process, not necessarily the product. But in reality, though, I do know teachers have to write report cards, and we're writing IEPs, and we're trying to make plans for students. But what I do think is we can't get to that until we have that connection piece and communication. So that can be a really valid goal. So looking at, you may, like, I'll use that example of the teacher's goal for this particular grade 1 student in the first term is to use a marker and make marks on a paper. But we can use co-regulation to get there. I don't know if I'm answering the question very accurately.
Yeah, so it would be one of the strategies used to get a goal.
Okay. Yeah. So, but if we get too invested in the product, then I think we lose some of the finesse in the process, and in honoring where the child's at and how they're going to progress. So being aware that that might be towards the end, but forcing a child to pick up a pen and do it's not going to help. So, but being co-regulatory with the child and thinking of those opportunities, whether it's parallel, like what Linda was saying, or if it's contingent, or you can choose the color and I'll do the writing. Maybe that's where you start. Like there's ways to build that in. So I think if we think about the process, that can help. I don't know if that answers your question, but maybe people will have more comments and questions as we go along.
Anybody feel free to add to that. Okay, thank you so much, Linda, Michelle, and I think we need to open up for a few minutes for questions. And so if you have a question, you can put up your hand or you can type it into the chat, and we'll try and ask those. Michelle, can I leave you to monitor if anybody's putting up their hand? Okay.
I will.
Okay, great. As we start, a few people had posted questions already when they signed up. And so here is a question from a parent with a child of ADHD. How to present importance of co-regulation to teachers who want to separate and seat a child in the classroom away from other children to manage the behavior. That's a pretty big question.
Yeah, well, and I think this pertains to what I was talking about a little bit before. When we see disruptive behavior, that tells me there's not a competent role. What can we do to create competence in that moment? But I think where it has to start for all of us is just that shift in mindset. Like, are we, how can we help the teacher view the disruptive behavior as, or even this is Ross Green, lagging skills or not yet competent, rather than disruptive behavior? Because I think if you view it as disruptive behavior, you're going to think about how can I stop that disruptive behavior? But if you view it as not competent in the moment, lagging skills, then you think about what's the skill I need to support in there, or how can I create competence in there? And then if we, are able to view it in that other way, in that more positive way, then it's going to inform the strategies and approaches that we use, which will pull into co-regulation. So I think it's the deeper work of the teachers to how can we help them shift their mindset, which is the question. Which is, I think everybody here is like on that same journey and shares that same vision and hope for our educators in schools. So maybe even sharing this recording with those teachers could be a way to get started on that journey of changing mindset. I think that's where it begins.
Thank you. We've answered many of these already, but I have a 10-year-old student with FASD whom I really struggle to co-regulate with. I'd love to hear if there are any strategies, particularly for an individual like this. I find that he becomes dysregulated very quickly, and the trigger is difficult to identify.
Yeah, I think, like, again, I'm going to go back to that competent role, like just thinking about a competent role. So whatever you engage in, sometimes where it starts, so say you just want to start in a playful way, for example, and not necessarily like an academic or a school related process, but just establishing that connection. In my mind, I always think about, okay, what can this student do? What is something that I know they can do? And that's where I'm going to start. And then it becomes about, okay, how can I partner with them in this area that I know they feel competent in? And I show interest in that, or I find ways to be a partner in that to first establish the connection and then grow from there. In other aspects, again, I'm just going to think about what is a developmentally just right role for that person within what we're doing. For someone, like it could be just thinking about that assembly line mindset. It could be parallel opportunities. One role that we didn't yet talk about that I use a lot with kids is the idea of being a watcher or being an observer. And I use that language a lot with kids because when kids are unsure of their own competence or they feel fearful in joining something new because they don't know that they'll be competent, they say, no, they don't want to do it. And I have found if I say something like, you totally do not have to do it, you can just watch for now, or how about you be my watcher? I will do it, you can watch. And for a lot of kids, being a watcher is a competent role, and then it allows them to observe this process that is not yet familiar, and then they start to join in on their own. So that can also be just a really valuable role for kids that reduces pressure that might lead to dysregulation.
I really like that idea. I would never have thought of that. But yeah, because we want kids to tune in and you know, in training with social thinking years ago and things, we talk about kids being able to understand the social context, to understand what's going on around. We encourage kids to like think with their eyes and things like that. So this fits really well with being a watcher. And it cued something else that I had highlighted in your book about using declarative language to identify people's roles. So not only are you a watcher, but maybe even giving them hints as to what you're doing. So you're going to look and see what your friends are doing. You know, because
Right.
they might think watchers looking at the TV screen, you know, like, you know, doing some things like that. So I really like that idea of defining the role and using declarative language as an invitation for that as well. We did have something in the chat here: supports in addressing competitiveness with co-regulation.
Yeah, I actually have I have an article that I can link in on my website, and it's called oh, I can't remember the title, but it's just about helping kids feel more comfortable with competition or creating positive context to enter competition, or just that idea
Mhm.
where it's really, really hard for some kids. So in that article, I spell out like 4 or 5 different ideas that are my go-tos. But to give a couple off the top of my head, I think about, not if a child has a really hard time with competition, then I'm not going to start practicing it in a kid-to-kid context, because that's going to just up the demand and the complexity and the pace even more. I'm going to start just myself and that child and think about like, okay, how can I provide opportunities where it feels safe to them to maybe lose at times? And then from that, I think about games that can be quick, and there's a lot of wins and losses in a row. So examples might be tic-tac-toe, something like that. But not like a game of sorry that takes forever to play and then there's only one winner. Like that feels yucky, right? So if we're doing like tic-tac-toe, I can let that child like win a bunch, and then I might win if I can. Um, and I'm coming off of very recent memories of their win, so the loss won't be as hard. And then when they experience the loss, what I'm going to spotlight is, wow, I love how you managed that loss. That was really cool. Um, and just helping them know that that's an important and good thing, that they're someone who can handle loss and are, they can manage that. How cool. Um, like another one of my absolute favorites when you are going into a context where you have peer interaction is to change games to be kids versus grown-ups. So then it's like the kids can gang up on the adult, like you can handle the loss, so you can manage it. But even when they do lose, they have each other. So they have a positive peer connection to experience that loss together. So it could be we're playing soccer together and the kids are playing against me, and I get a goal, but they get a goal, that sort of thing. So they can beat me fully, or at times I get a goal, but they can handle it because they have each other. Um, yeah. So those are a
And
couple of ideas, but that article, I have a couple more. Yeah.
I can see that working well in a classroom environment. Sometimes I see, you know, as a reward system, if kids are listening, they get, you know, coins in a jar. But I would love to see that with, you know, they could compete with the teacher too. You know,
Mhm.
you could get creative
Yeah.
and have some fun with that. I like that idea of, you know, having someone to lose with.
Yeah.
Really
It's really
better.
fun. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, and I know I've had I've just had kids, and it's just like, whoa, like any competitive context damages their relationship with each other. And therefore, if I make it kids first grown-ups, it strengthens their relationship with each other and it allows it to build, and I can handle loss, so I'm cool. It's okay. Yeah. Or when I do beat them, again, like I said, it strengthens their relationship versus weakens it because they lost together.
That is beautiful. I didn't ever think of those ideas. So thank you so much. We don't have any other questions to discuss right now. So that brings us to the end of this discussion. I am so grateful to you, Michelle, and to you, Linda, for joining me and talking about this really important topic of co-regulation. And if anybody here wants to dive deeper into co-regulation, and you haven't yet read the book, it's a great place to start. But also, Linda has beautiful things on her website. So I highly, highly recommend going to that website. It's declarativelanguage.com. So it's pretty easy, but it also includes the co-regulation stuff right in that website. So please go there. And so I want to also thank you all for joining us here, because it's such an important thing to be discussing. I will email the replay link to you in days to come, and please feel free to share it with others, because the more that we can get the word out, the better. I hope you enjoyed the workshop. And if you'd like to be part of other events like this, I welcome you to go to thewithgift.com and take a peek at what we have to offer there. We do a book club almost monthly, and there's some really awesome book discussions. And please consider, even if you can't be at the book club, check out the books, because they are some really good books there. And we also have a With Gift community, and there's also some other resources on that site, including the declarative language discussion that we had with Linda in the spring. So please go check that out. And I want to thank you all again for being here today. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Michelle, for joining me.
And thank you. And
rest
thank you, Heide, for creating a space where we could have these
Yeah.
discussions and tapping into all of our contacts and community connections, so that we can come together and have such insightful and meaningful, as someone had said, very insightful conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. It was great to spend time with you again.
I love it. So watch everybody for possible follow-up in the coming months. I'll let you know.